Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Welcome. Please check the chat for our welcome questions so we get to know each other in the beginning of this call. Let us know where you're coming from, where you're joining us from. And so happy to be your host today. I'm Helen. I am the community manager at ADPList. And without further ado, let's get it started. Welcome to Product Week, an event designed to help you level up your PM skills and career. This event is powered by ADPList, the biggest peer-to-peer learning platform in the world. This event is powered by ADPList, the biggest peer-to-peer learning platform in the world. If you want to learn, get mentored from the best tech talents in the world, discuss ideas and network, ADPList is a perfect match for you. We are 100% free. In this event, you can have a chance to win an Apple Watch. For Product Week, we're giving away an Apple Watch, kindly sponsored by the Product Academy. All you have to do is share what you have learned from our sessions on LinkedIn and Twitter. Tag the speaker, so in this case, Mohammed, and ADPList. Details will be shared in the chat section. Now, for us to run the session smoothly, here are some housekeeping rules. Please keep your cameras on at all times. Please use your real name on Zoom and Slido. Presentation will be 30 minutes, followed up by a 15 minutes Q&A. For the Q&A, we are using Slido to manage questions. Scan the QR code behind me, or click the link in the chat section where you can ask all of your questions. Please remember to send questions with your name, since anonymous questions will not be considered. You can also upvote each other's questions for our speaker today. The session will be recorded and we will share the recording as soon as it is available. To get the recording, please register in our landing page. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce all of you to Mohammed. Mohammed is the founder and CEO at Design Pro. He graduated from Stanford. He's a former Google, Siri, Apple product manager, now starting his own company, building collaboration software for design teams. And today he's going to be talking to us about how product managers can think in design. Welcome, Mohammed. I give you the stage now.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining me on this talk today. So let me just share my screen. All right. So again, thank you for joining me. We are going to talk about how product managers can think in design. And more specifically, we're going to go into design thinking, as well as 4 powerful tools that you can use to elevate your work as a product manager. This presentation is really here to serve as an introduction, and I hope it inspires you to dig deeper into some of these topics on your own. So let's just jump in. So the first question is, what is design thinking, right? And people usually think that design thinking has something to do with being artistic or having a sense of aesthetics or style or creating beauty. And what I like to say is that design thinking is actually none of these things. What design thinking really is a process for problem solving. And you can think of design thinking as this essential, powerful tool, in your toolbox as a product manager, which you can use to problem solve. And it can be used by many people in the organization, by UX designers, product managers, or any type of creative employee. And it's really something that can be used to infuse any type of creative problem solving into all levels of the organization, whether you're designing a logo or some screens or even some strategy or a hiring strategy as well. And it's really about helping drive this sense of innovation, throughout your company. So what is the process for problem solving? Well, the first step is understanding the problem. Then it is defining the size and impact of that problem. It's coming up with ideas that are hopefully unique and novel, and then going out and building a solution. And finally, testing and measuring that solution against that original definition of the problem that you came up with. And so the process looks something quite like this. And if we compare this process to the Stanford design thinking model, you'll notice that it looks very similar. The difference is that in the Stanford design thinking model, we use the word empathize, which is really about understanding the problem. And we'll go a little bit deeper into that a bit later. So as a product manager, what are the benefits for me, right? As a product manager in the company, by using the design thinking process? Well, the process really puts you in a position so you pay attention, right? You pay attention to the things around you, the customers, the market, any of the niches that are happening around you, because that's really where the innovation and the unique stuff is happening, right? It also helps you identify the problems and clarify those problems to the rest of your team, right? It's no point identifying the problem and not being able to communicate and articulate that problem to the different stakeholders on your team, whether those stakeholders are engineers or sales or even the CEO himself or herself. The second strength is that it helps you generate new insights that are non-obvious, and that leads to innovation. As a product manager, you're not supposed to be the person that comes up with all the great ideas yourself, but the tools that design thinking provides you helps you get the most out of your team, right? And helps you get these great ideas from not just yourself, but from the team and the people around you. And the last is that it helps you as a product manager to test these ideas and rapidly iterate, so that you can make faster decisions, right? As a product manager, you don't want to slow things down. You don't want to be stuck in hours of endless meetings debating certain decisions. Put it out there, test it, rapidly iterate, and it can actually make you progress faster. So what are some of the problems that you can solve with design thinking? Well, it turns out that there's a lot you can actually apply design thinking to, whether it's designing your career or reinventing a business model, starting a company, or whether it's even around shifting markets and customer behaviors, or solving problems that data, can't really solve because it requires answering the question why. So for this talk, we're going to go into a case study around helping your business thrive in a post-COVID-19 world. And I thought it could be really interesting to take a look on how you can use design thinking to do that. So I'm going to use Neuron Mobility, which is an e-scooter company. It's a company that I used to be at a couple of years back. And I'm going to go through a case study of actually using design thinking to solve some of the challenges for e-scooters. And so if you can imagine, during COVID-19, there was a lockdown, and our market was Australia, right? And Australia is quite strict. So during a lockdown, well, people can't go out and ride scooters. And so there's low demand. And low demand means there's also low revenue for the company. At the same time, there's a lot of high costs that the company has to sustain because it's an operations type company, right? The cost of employees, of equipment, and so on. So how do you use design thinking to actually solve some of these problems? Well, one of my previous managers, his name is Gokul Rajaram, he actually came up with an article called Play Offense During a Downturn. So he actually encouraged us to look for opportunities to widen the gap with competitors, even during a downturn. And so I was really inspired to do that. And so the question that I set out to solve or to answer for myself and my team is, how do we as a product management team make our business thrive in a post-lockdown situation? And there were 4 questions that I put out there to go out and answer. The first is, how do we discover new customer segments, right, within our existing market? Then how do we increase loyal customers, right? This is really a question around, how do you get more retention? How do you get more out of the customers that you already have? And then we go on to, how do we find new distribution channels, right? So we have a great market and we're accessing them, but how do we find new things? How do we grow the business? And then lastly, how do we discover new business models? So Neuron had a pay per ride model, but it wasn't something for everyone and it wasn't working for everyone. So how do we come up with new business models to make pricing available for more people? So for this presentation, I'm going to focus on one of these questions, which is, how do we discover new customer segments? So the first question, and really the first topic actually, if you remember from the previous slide, is empathize, right? But before we go into that, what is empathy? Well, empathy is about understanding someone from their perspective. And there are 4 ways you can do that. You can listen to what they say. You can hear what they think. You can observe what they did. And you can understand what they felt. And what I like to encourage all of you to do is to focus more on the 2 boxes on the right, to really observe what people do and to understand how they feel. Because this is where the actual motivations around using products comes from. So if we start off with our case study, the first thing that I did to understand our customer segments is that I sent a survey to several thousands of our users, and I tried to understand who they are. I looked at their gender, their industry, what location and city that they were at, and so on. And I found a few patterns. I discovered that there were very few women in our demographic, actually only about 20%. So women did not ride scooters as often as men. Also, we had a group of people that were loyal commuters. They loved using scooters to get to work. And then turns out our cities also had quite large populations of university students. And so there was actually a cluster of passionate students. For this presentation, I'm going to talk about the first 2, the women demographic as well as the loyal commuters. So how did we go about understanding the woman demographic? Well, we started by conducting 10 interviews with our users. And the first thing I did was that I got them to remember an exact time where they traveled on a trip. So I asked them the question, what was your choice of transportation on your last trip, right? It grounds them into a specific example, specific scenario. Then what I do, the first tool that I use is I ask the 3 whys. The rule here is that when you ask 3 whys, you actually get to the root core of the problem, right? When you ask why one time, you don't really get to the underlying reason. So the idea is to really get to the root of what's driving the behavior here. So I asked the question, why was it not a scooter? And when they gave me an answer, I asked them 3 whys to really get to why were they really not using a scooter? And I found a few insights that I would not have come up with myself. So the first is, for women, there was no place to hand their handbag or heavy groceries, which they tended to do a lot, is use scooters for groceries. But there was no place to hang all of that stuff when you're riding back on a scooter. Also, they didn't feel safe walking at night. And this was surprising to me because, hey, Australia's, first world country, shouldn't it be feel safe? And it turns out that that wasn't the truth. And so they ended up choosing to take an Uber instead. But one really interesting thing that we found, an opportunity, is that they preferred scooters to bicycles because it was easier on skirt and heels, but also because there's a culture of bicyclists being very aggressive, and the women demographic did not associate themselves with that type of behavior. And so they actually wanted to use scooters, but they just didn't have the tools to be able to do so. So that was super interesting. And we did the same thing for the commuter demographic as well. So for the commuters, we asked the question, just like the women demographic, to get them to remember an exact scenario, a specific time where they took their last scooter ride. And we asked them, well, where did you go? And then we also asked the 3 whys, why did you take a scooter this time? And we found some really interesting insights. We found out that actually going to work included using a scooter and taking a train and bus. And this was actually kind of mind-blowing at the time, because we thought the train and the bus were competitors to the scooter. But actually what we discovered was that the scooter was a complement to the train and bus, right? They took the train and the bus to their work, but the last mile, that last, 5 minutes, they used the scooter. Also, they tended to use scooters when they were rushing around and when they were getting late for a meeting. And this was particularly important, when there's traffic and it's they're sort of, right at the edge there, not making their meeting. And this is really important because it really places a very high value on scooters, right? The scooter is no longer a vehicle to get you from A to B. It's actually a tool to be able to not make your meeting and not be late for, say, meeting your boss. And people place a lot more value on that, right? So what we found is that actually speed, being faster, is a lot more important than price. So another thing that we didn't expect. So now that we did some analysis on really understanding our customer segments, this is now the second step on defining the problem. So how do we define the problem? If you remember what I said, as a product manager, it's really important to identify the problem, but also to articulate it and clarify it for your stakeholders on your team. Well, for the women demographic, we actually distilled it down to the need to feel safe and to feel secure. For commuters, we made a bold statement that convenience actually matters more than price. And we did the same thing for scooters. We found out that students actually love scooters, but for them, the price was actually too expensive. So it was a completely different finding, but also really interesting. So for this example of this presentation, we'll take a look into the women demographic for the next step of our design thinking process. So the third step here is ideate. This is where the fun begins, right? Because now you can actually start getting stakeholders, people from your team into a room. And if you don't have a physical space, if you're working remotely, well, there's a lot of virtual tools that you can use these days. There's Mural, there's InVision, even Figma Jam as well. But the idea is to get your stakeholders into one place, whether it's a room or a phone call or a video call, and to focus everyone on that definition that we just came up with in the step prior, which is, in our case, helping women feel safer and more secure on scooters. Now, what I like to do, a little trick that I tend to do during brainstorming, is to actually spend the first 10 minutes where every individual in that room writes as many solutions as possible on a Post-it themselves. And it's going to feel a little weird in the beginning because it's going to be 10 minutes of silence. But what it does is it gets every individual to just put their ideas down without feeling, any pressures from the groupthink, phenomenon. So spend 10 minutes where every individual writes the solutions on the Post-its. Then, as a product manager, you can facilitate everyone coming together, posting their Post-its. And now, as a product manager, you can facilitate putting those post-its in themes and clusters and patterns. And now, as a product manager as well, you can help facilitate that discussion and help the team prioritize which are the ideas that are the biggest impact and the most important to tackle first. And for our case study, in my example, we actually came up with 30 ideas. Like, that's the number that you should be hitting. But I can't talk about all of them. But here are 5 example ideas, that we came up with to help women feel a little bit more secure, a little bit more safer. So the first is adding a hook for the grocery bag. The second is an alarm for riding at night. Third is the follow my ride feature. So you can share your ride with your friend. So your friend can make sure that you're okay and you get home safely. And then we even thought about like this crazy idea of a neighborhood watch via a network of scooters, and even like, other ideas that are out there, like riding with your pet. How can we make that a lot easier and more fun? For this presentation, I'm gonna show you an example of a prototype for the hook for the grocery bag. So on the prototype step, another very fun step to look at. This is an example of a prototype that we built for the hook. It literally took 30 minutes to build, and that's the amount of time that we're talking about to build prototypes. Because what you want to do is to quickly build it, quickly verify your assumptions, and if you remember from the empathy step, we want to be able to observe. So you want to put this in front of real people, and you don't want them to have them tell you what they think. You want them to actually observe. So here's the prototype we built, and we actually got people to start riding the scooter with this example grocery bag that we hacked together. And what we want to do here now in the prototype and the test measure phase is really, to sum it up, it's about making it less expensive to fail, right? As a product manager, when you launch your product to the world, you don't want to be surprised. You don't want to fail then, right? What you want to do is you want to fail what we call lower down in the value chain, where it is cheaper, where it's faster, it's easier, there's less risk. You don't want to be failing when you're actually launching your product, right? So much better to prototype quickly, get it out there and learn all of these questions, right? And some of the questions that came up for us is, when we put this together, is does it flop from side to side? We noticed that the bag was actually moving around, right? So is that going to be a problem? Because you need to balance on a scooter, and if a bag is flopping side to side, it's going to affect your balance. The other thing is that we were operating in Australia, and Australians tend to be pretty tall. And so then the question is, does the rider need to bend a little bit too low to pick up their grocery bag? Like, is it convenient? That was something else that came up. And then the last thing is, actually, can it support 5 kg? So very often when you're going to the groceries, you might get a carton of milk or something a bit heavier. So you also need a hook that can support quite a bit of weight. So you can see here, within 30 minutes, we already open up a lot of these important questions that now the team, and as me as a product manager, I can now guide the team to start delegating and solving these problems. If you are using a virtual tools, or you're launching a virtual product, totally fine. There's a lot of prototyping tools out there. There's Figma, there's a whole bunch of others I'm sure you're familiar with. But the whole idea here is get a group of beta testers together, observe, so put yourself in a position where they're using the product, observing, and continually question your assumptions. A quick tip here, a powerful tool that I've been using is creating a brain trust for your feedback. And how does this brain trust work? Well, it's about getting people together that you trust and that are willing to provide candid and honest feedback. Great people to include in your brain trust are mentors and advisors. So call them up and get them to be involved, get them vested in your product and involved. Present your ideas like a show and tell, and then listen to their feedback, right? So this is your inner circle group that's going to tell you the things that maybe other people are a little bit too shy to tell you, right? And that's really important to know early in the beginning. And where did I learn this? I actually learned this from Ed Catmull. Ed Catmull is the founder of Pixar, and he writes about the brain trust in his book, Creativity, Inc., and actually credits the brain trust for Pixar's ability to launch amazing movies, which is a really big statement to say. So it sounds really simple to create a brain trust, but it's really powerful to have this in your back pocket for your products. So why don't we circle back to the original 4 questions that I wanted to answer for my case study, which is how do we make our business thrive in a post-lockdown, and see how this design thinking process, when applied to each one, what it turned out. So the first is, how do we discover new customer segments? So we went through all of that together. We talked about the women demographic, the commuters, and also we did the same thing for students. So these are the 3 segments that we wanted to focus more on to increase our business, right? Then we also applied design thinking to how do we increase loyal customers? Same thing here. You know, we did the design thinking process, and we found out that we can provide them with incentives. We can offer them a free monthly pass, and we even have more deeper, safer features like follow my ride. How do we find new distribution channels? Well, same thing. We discovered that Google Maps actually would be a great way to distribute e-scooters, and we actually started a partnership with them. And we also offered a loyalty program via coffee shops through discounts. And the last is, how do we discover new business models? If you remember, I said that Neuron had a pay per ride model, but using this design thinking process, we actually came up with a new model, an innovative new model that no one else had, which was subscription passes. And we actually got people to subscribe to Neuron services in a 3-day, weekly, and monthly pass system. So really great outcomes using this very simple but powerful design thinking model. So that wraps up the design thinking portion. But I would also like to talk about 4 powerful tools to elevate your work as a PM. And so let's jump straight into that. The first tool is get clear on what you are selling. So as a product manager, yes, your job is to write requirements, to do designs, but actually what you really need to think about in the beginning is, how do you sell a product to your customers? Well, let's take a look at what Amazon did. So Amazon asked this really powerful question: what am I selling today that customers will want 10 years from now? And as you all know from the story of Amazon, they started selling books online. That's how they began. But Jeff Bezos understood that he was selling much more than just books online. He was actually selling an innovative new shopping experience. And the way how he came out to discover that was that he asked himself this exact question: what am I selling today that customers will want 10 years from now? For him, that was the lowest prices, the fastest shipping and convenience, and biggest product variety. Nothing about that says I'm selling books. All of that talks about selling an innovative new shopping experience. So ask this question to yourself and to your product team, because you may discover that you're actually selling something a lot more powerful than just books. Number 2, generate cash flow on day 1. So why do you want to generate cash flow on day 1? Because generating cash flow creates a sustainable business, which is a much more powerful type of business in especially today's environment. Sarah Blakely from Spanx, if you don't know her story, please go look it up. She bootstrapped $5,000 of her own money and raised $0 of venture capital to build a $1 billion company. How did she do that? Well, she first targeted a customer segment that has a strong willingness to pay. This is a very important point, because as a product manager, you can be the best at writing requirements, you can be the best at designing an awesome interface, but if your customer segment does not have a willingness to pay, you will not have a sustainable, long-lasting business. And as a product manager in today's world, it is now up to us to think about whether that customer segment has a willingness to pay. In Sarah's case, she actually chose the women's segment, and she found a segment that had a very strong willingness to pay for the undergarments that she was designing. Secondly, women's undergarments are designed by men. At least that was the case before Sarah came into the picture. And so what she did is she surprised and delighted her customers with a very unique and differentiated product. She believed that women's undergarments should be designed, well, by women, which totally makes sense. And so think about how your product surprises and delights your customers, how it's unique and differentiated. It will be a lot more powerful than a product that is a little bit better than the rest. Third tool is look for inflections. So what are inflections? Inflections are shifts that change the market, right? Change the game. And there are 4 types of inflections. And as a product manager, sometimes you're in a startup where you don't have as many resources as the incumbents in the market, right? The Amazons, the Facebooks, they're the ones that have the resources. They're the ones that have the money, the people power. So how do you as a startup compete with that, right? It sounds so hard. So inflections are the key that you can take advantage of that changes the nature of the game. And you can do that by, number 1, looking for adoption inflections. This is when people start adopting new technologies or platforms. Maybe they're adopting TikTok or WhatsApp. As a product manager, it's your role to look out for that, to keep an eye out on that. You know, what are people using these days? How can we take advantage of that? The other is belief inflections. This is when people change their beliefs about the world. So when COVID-19 and the pandemic hit, people were forced to work remotely, and people that wanted to, work in the office or wanted to work in person couldn't do that. And so they had to change their beliefs. They had to see that, okay, remote work was a viable option. And so look for that, look for these changes in beliefs. The third is regulatory inflection. So this is when, say, governments or regulators also change. So in California, they passed a law that allowed for medical marijuana, for example. Or in the case of Neuron, new cities were offering licenses for e-scooters and e-bikes because scooters were a much more safer way to get around town than getting crowded in a bus full of other people, right, during the pandemic. So look for these regulatory inflections as well. And the last one is the market technology inflections, where there are shifts in the market of technologies, right? So keep an eye out for that. Examples are 5G, opening up new bandwidth for video and other types of content formats. Crypto, of course, blockchain, you guys probably know a lot about that. And then maturing of AI frameworks such as GPT-3. So look for these types of technologies that are, bringing new introductions to the market. Just a quick note about Siri. So Siri actually used 2 of these inflections to find success. It used the adoption inflection because people back in 2008 were starting to adopt the iPhone. And so Siri was primarily on the phone. And then it also used technology inflections such as speech recognition technology. So it turned out at that time, also in 2008, speech technology was starting to become mature. So what Siri did is it combined both, right? It combined the phone, the adoption inflection, and the technology inflection, and took advantage of that and was able to then, create momentum and find some success. The last one here that I want to spend time on is really around the tool of mastering influence and persuasion, something you're going to have to do a lot as a product manager in an organization, big or small. So what is influence? Influence is moving another person towards action without the use of direct power. So direct power means that you're the boss, right? You're the manager. You can tell people what to do. As a product manager, you're not always the boss. You can't always just tell people. So you need to influence people to action without that use of telling people what to do. So how do you do that? Well, in my experience, I've had some great managers in the past, and I've found that the ones who are the most influential are also the ones who are inspirational, right? They inspire us to see beyond what we want to do and instead what we could do. So they call us towards possibilities. And as a product manager, you can take on that mantle, that role, to be that influential person by being inspirational, show people what they could do. And it's important to know that you can shift from being dead set on your idea to actually seeking insights and empathy on why others might benefit from the idea, right? So if you have this great vision, this inspirational idea, and you want people to be enthusiastic about it, make it about them. Like, don't make it about you. Show them why they may benefit from your idea, and you will find that it will be a lot easier for them to get on board. And the last point here is really about persuasion. So persuasion is different from influence. It's about telling or convincing someone to take action on your behalf. So this is the case where you already know what you want to do, but you just need a little help from someone to kind of push things through, right? As a product manager, I'm sure you find yourself a lot in that situation. So how do you do that? Well, you can instill credibility. And if you don't have that credibility, you can use these tools to create credibility, right? Highlight your experiences in the past. Use past history of a track record, or even use your excitement, right? So here's an example here where instead of saying, I think that we should use these design elements, instead rephrase it as, these are the key design elements that have successfully differentiated and delighted users in the past, right? So you bring in a bit more credibility into this. Secondly is invoking imagination and feelings. So we talked a little bit about this in influence, about really making it visual, right? Like showing them the way, creating a story. Story is a great way to show this and communicate this. So instead, use the term imagine this. A customer is. Let's sketch our ideas, right? So try using those terms instead. And then the last part is really around providing reasonable rationale. So there's going to be people in your organization for sure that are more rational thinkers, right? They need data. They need to like have logic. So, all right, as a product manager, you need to talk to those types of people too. So instead of saying, I think, or my opinion is, you can say data from research indicates, or market research uncovered, right? Use the data, again, put things outside of you, don't make it about you. And yeah, I think you will find a lot more success. So thank you very much. Hopefully this was helpful and informative to you. I think we have some questions, and if you want to ask me any further questions, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Let's go to the questions. Yeah, first question up is from April. How do you define successful product manager and product designer relationship? How do you differentiate the responsibility for each roles in product research?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So good question. When you ask this question, it reminds me of a relationship that I observed back at Apple that we all know about, and that is super successful to answer this. And that's Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive. If you think about Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive, Steve Jobs is sort of that product manager, right? He's the guy that has to sell what Johnny Ive is designing. And when I think of a successful relationship between product manager and product designer, they are so in tune with each other that the product manager can sell what the product designer is designing, and vice versa. The product designer is designing what the product manager wants to sell. So think about that, when you think about this relationship. How do you make your relationship with the product designer almost like a Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive? And in terms of differentiating the responsibility, of course, they tend to bleed, right? Product managers can also give suggestions on design. Product designers can also give suggestions on the customer and the business. So there shouldn't be like this hard, line, but you can think about it as you are part of each other's brain trust, right? We talk about the brain trust. And so it's really about you and the product designer giving each other candid feedback on each other's roles and being there for each other, almost like, partners in crime type of thing. And together you're able to design great products, but also to sell those products as well. And that's what I think a great relationship looks like.
Beautiful. I love that Bonnie and Clyde sort of vibe. That's very,
Yeah.
I think that's great. Thank you so much for that. Next question we have is from Rohan. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. How do you influence, persuade teammates if your idea comes from your gut?
It's a great question because I've actually found myself in these situations where I'm working with, say, someone who's a very data-minded person. And, we talk a lot about data in our world. But if you think about it, Apple didn't come out with the iPad or the iPhone from data. It came out from the gut, right? So how do you communicate that? And I think it really goes back to telling a very strong story, right? Making it visual. You have to, if it's coming from your gut, it means there's something about your intuition that makes you see it, right? But other people don't have that necessarily. You need to help them see it. You can help them see it by making it visual. You can start sketching. You can say, imagine this customer who wants to do this, right? Get them to imagine a scenario or tell a story. Like, these are ways to ground these, intuitions that are coming from your gut and making it more real for your teammates. Hope that helps.
Beautiful. Yeah. So basically, like, helping other people visualize where you're coming from. Love that. Thank you. I think that's great. So Yastika asked, how do you prioritize the raw solutions and structure them? It would be great if you could please share a framework that in your experience worked.
Yeah, sounds good. So there are a number of frameworks that you can use out there, like the RICE framework. That's RICE. So go check it out. It's something that's pretty common and standard. And, for your team, you can have a RICE framework in mind. At the same time, if everyone in the world use RICE framework, then they should be succeeding, right? But not every startup or everyone can succeed in the same way. I think it's also important to add your perspective, right? And again, people do need either a story or data to back it up. So if you have an intuition that, this product should be more important, it is good to either tell a story or back it up with data. A great way to back it up with data is to ground it into the metrics that are really important for your business. So if retention is really important for your business, you can prioritize your features by that metric, right? By retention. So that's something that I've used to, yes, I've used RICE framework, but I've also added my own taste, my own perspective on what the prioritization should be based on the metrics and based on stories and what's important. Cool. Any other questions? I don't know if Helen dropped off. All right, so I'll take them.
Sorry. Thank you. No, it's mute. Yeah. So
it's on mute.
we're gonna. Thank you so much. We're gonna take one last question because we're running out of time, unfortunately. So Diane asked, how do you do your users' research feedback when you do not have an existing product yet?
Yeah, I also really like this question because one of the things that I learned from doing my previous company is that I went into the product and I built the product too fast. This time, when I'm doing my company, I'm actually spending a lot more time on the user research and the feedback. So how does that work, right? there's a lot of different ways that you can do feedback, but you can think about it as look at the entities in your ecosystem, right? Don't think about the product as the center of the ecosystem yet. Think about your customers, think about the competitors, think about the, the potential new customers with a new behavior, partners, and so on. Think about those people first. Put those people front and center, and your research will just naturally start to gravitate towards the people, the entities in your ecosystem. As you start understanding about those people, you can do it through either Google search, you can look at Forrester, you can then talk to your customers, right? Find who is your customer, talk to them, start laying it out on a board, right? It could be a fig jam, it could be, on your wall. And it's almost like putting a puzzle piece together. You need to make sure all the entities work together, and the product is just there to scale it, to manifest it. So that's how I like to do my user research these days. I like to almost think about it as a puzzle. I'm like a private investigator, and I'm learning about the customers, the competitors. I'm finding out what is it that motivates them. And then I can see, oh, this is now the product that can address, all of these partners at the same time. So great question. Yeah.